Welcome to Towne Place Museum District residents. I'm Scott Seeley from Air Communities, owner and operator of Parktown. This is a special place. Situated on Benjamin Franklin Parkway, Parktown has a long and storied history. Constructed in the 1950s, the complex is listed on the National Registry of Historic Places and is the first mid-century modern multifamily complex in the Commonwealth to achieve this designation. A few years ago, we remodeled all apartments and common areas, carefully keeping the historic character-defining features. We rebranded it Towne Place Museum District residents to pay homage to our famous neighbors, Philadelphia's treasured cultural institutions, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Barnes, the Franklin Institute, Moore College of Art, and several others. Our goal was to weave Parktown into the fabrics of the Parkway as an art and cultural destination, even as an apartment complex. However, the Museum District residents had a big problem. We didn't have any art. So we decided to have a permanent collection and solicit artists from Philadelphia, the Commonwealth, throughout the country, and even the world. Our permanent collection, now at more than 150 pieces, represents established and up-and-coming artists and some commission work as well. We partnered with InLiquid to offer robust programming, temporary rotational exhibits, usually changed 3 times a year, artist talks and workshops, and the very popular drink and draw. What started as an idea to engage our residents became Air Communities and Parktown's gift to Philadelphia, a place where artists and residents alike can come to be inspired and educated while enjoying this creative, ever-changing, and vibrant community.
I always try to include intimacy, light, and mood in my work, and for me, the idea of home is really important. I think it stems from childhood and having that comfort, but then as you get older, especially now in times with COVID and we're all on lockdown, I think even more so, having that secure, safe place is necessary. With this idea of hygge and coziness for me doesn't necessarily mean a crackling fire and a blanket. It is this sense of light and warmth and beauty within the space you are. The sculptures really came from this idea of removing the lens for the viewer, because instead of hiding behind that lens and that picture frame, I really wanted to bring the 3-dimensional to the viewer, where they could really get up close to the piece and interact with it, spend more time with it, explore the entire room, and really relate to it in a different way that you can't relate to necessarily in a photograph. It's sort of like there's some take on the uncanny as well here. The stairs in one of the photos, it's impossible to walk up or down those stairs. They're so steep. Some of the wood grain on the wall, it's obvious that it's really out of scale. So those little touches bring in this element of the uncanny, which makes the viewer oscillate between sort of this feeling of uneasiness and this feeling of home. And that's really what I try to do within the pieces.
A feeling of comfort that's associated with the idea of home, coming home, visualizing home. And in a way, I feel it's the lack of that, these pieces. Because of the white background kind of glowing, and it's like, oh, it's like this idealized kind of place. Like if this house was in actual size, you would be about 50 or so feet away. In all these images, you're always that far away from it. You can never quite attain it. They're all done in the dark room, and they're not done with a camera or a lens. They are photograms. So these are objects that are placed on the photographic surface, and light shines through them, and you get initially a negative version of the object, but then I do this process where I reverse it, and I get this white background, and it becomes a positive of the original. I go through different tries of getting the image right, and what I consider the image to be right could be the right amount of green and the right amount of detail in one area. But I'm left over with like 5 or 6 versions of the same subject. And then I animate them. So I kind of put them together and looking like a flip book. Because since all the objects are the same, they are kind of the same ratio, so you can kind of line them up and make them an animation from it. It's like an idealized way of viewing the piece because the thing is actually breathing and kind of moving, and there's like another way of you interacting with the photograph.
And then I never take like one photo that translates into a painting. It's usually like 20 to 100 photos that come together in a digital collage. I'm really interested in where the collage elements sort of start to break the information, or like it's not so clear, or there's duplication, or things kind of fall apart a little bit. That relates to memory a lot, and so I try to highlight that both in the collage process, but then also in the painting process when I start translating that. Specifically, these two pieces are from a body of work that was done with images from my childhood home. And so my relationship with that is a really complex relationship. Revisiting it and working with it in this way is like my way to kind of work through that and find the beauty in the space and kind of reframe that relationship. My focus is on relationships, like interpersonal relationships and that connection, and I see our spaces as like a really good way to represent that, those like poetic remnants of people and how that can talk about relationships. I find specifically with this one, the more you look at it, the more it unravels for you, and I find that really interesting. That experience can cause, you know, maybe frustration for some people, or maybe hopefully it draws you in more.
Warning signs, it was kind of like, okay, here's this space. It might look inviting. There's, you know, we're having tea, but maybe the person feels trapped. Maybe they don't want to be there. And so I think that you know, on a bigger scale, like the way you look and appear, it doesn't really say who you are. You know, on first glance, you might look at my work and it looks, oh, inviting, comfortable. There's a chair so you can relax and have some tea. And so I think it brings up the idea of home, and then in a space with other, you know, sculptural pieces that are like furniture and ideas of furniture. And for a long time, I really wasn't using the figure in my work because I really wanted furniture or objects to stand for the figure and to make us think about, well, what are our relationships with those things and items that are in our lives. And so I think it responds well to the furniture, or the furniture-like sculpture that's in the space.
Furniture provides the opportunity to bring ideas into the domestic environment, which are normally carried by works of art. It's kind of corny, but I've always thought of these as sculptures for the domestic environment. You know, the scale of them is of the human scale. They might not be furniture, like they're functional in the same way that normal furniture is functional, but the idiom of furniture is so familiar, so innately familiar. The connection with nature in an urban environment is really important to me here. I've done work outdoors. I've worked with a lot of materials that I've gathered myself out of the parklands. I spend a lot of time in the woods, and so that's an important connection, because my connection to my material is one of the primary reasons I do this. The transparency, the lightness of these is really important. They used to be much more kind of solid forms and much heavier. And with the mirrors, the sort of illusory space that's created by the object reflecting itself has, you know, a lot of formal impact, and I think it really engages the viewer in a physical way that I think is also quite emotional and leads to psychological parallels, you know, in terms of subject-object. You know, there really are objects of contemplation, and for me, contemplating, you know, a huge sculpture like something out there is very different. In a gallery environment or something is very different than contemplating something in the home.
It started out as the way all of my work starts out, as a bit of a collection in my studio. My background is textiles, And if you think of my work as crazy quilt, you'll have a good sense about how I collect materials and collect pre-used materials and put them together to create something that is its own element, that's like greater than its part. So my crazy quilt in this is very easy to understand because I collected credit cards and plastic cards. They're one of the things that we all have collections of. When I got like a whole stack of cards when my mother died and my father died, you know, I had a whole lifetime of cards. People do collect, particularly their ID cards. Cards really document our whole lives. And not only do they document our lives, but they give us access. You know, they give us memberships, they document class, what we belong to, our banks. When I first made this piece, it was a lot more stable looking. This becomes a little bit more conceptual. The base actually warped, and it led me to think that this whole idea was warped. This idea of living with cards is very unstable. I created a different base that kind of gives this sense of where is the point of balance and where is it going to begin to tumble. And now the story is not only about how I put the materials together and how I repurpose things, but it's really about how these cards are not recyclable. They're going to be with us forever.
All of the subjects are taken from personal memory or personal narratives, kind of obscured over time. The quilt piece is a replica of my great-grandmother's quilt, and the process was actually photographing it and then carving and taking each individual square and replicating the pattern for each individual square. And that object, I never knew my great-grandmother, but having this object, I feel like through these things we accumulate or these craft objects that other people make and that are passed down to us, we have some kind of connection to those people without actually having met them. The materials are generally things like poplar or basswood, which are more of like not glorified materials that are generally associated with woodworking. So like not like your walnuts or your maples or cherries or mahoganies. It's the things that are supposed to be painted but trying to uplift those objects. I'm not trying to fool anyone or trying to hide the fact that it's this material because that's what's connecting me to my predecessors in the first place, you know, that I'm trying to not hide that, but trying to elevate these objects as narrative tools. But I also like the idea that they kind of make this almost like a noir. You know, that everything is monotone. Furniture always relates to the human body, so I thought about if chairs are a replacement for humans or a cabinet is a replacement for humans, then the raw materials would just be an open kind of interpretation for any action. It doesn't really hold anyone to any specific movement so leaving it open. What this piece means to me, I don't feel like is really the focus of the space. It's more so the opportunity for other people to experience and walk through these spaces and imagine what their narrative is that fits in here. There's this idea in comic books called Blood in the Gutter, which is in between the panels, the viewer kind of fills in how the narrative plays out, you know, what's going on in between these spaces, and I kind of hope that's the reaction that people have.
You know, Towne Place, the galleries are light and spacious, and you know, also you have a captive audience of residents in and out that, you know, even if you're not an art lover, everyone really cares about art. They might not admit it or think they do, but I think if their life was devoid of that they would be having a very different experience. So I think having artwork here, it kind of forces people, you know, to see it, and I think that's a great thing.
On a larger scale, just Towne Place, where it's situated here on the Parkway in Philadelphia, it's just a wonderful investment within the community in terms of art. You've got all of these wonderful places, museums, the Barnes, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Rodin Museum here, and it really becomes this sort of cultural and artistic mecca here within Philadelphia.
When Towne decided to build their permanent art collection, you know, the proximity to the other museums was really a critical part. And so in their rebranding, they rebranded the Towne as the Museum District Residences. And by doing that, they made a commitment not only to creating a permanent collection, but creating a collection of artwork by contemporary Philadelphia artists. so that it actually works in tandem with the museums and creates a relationship. So not only can you go to the Barnes, you can go to the Franklin Institute or the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but you can come and see, shows of current contemporary work in Philadelphia that is meaningful by living artists. One of the exciting things about Parktown is that we have these big lobbies that provide exhibition opportunities for artists that are not generally there, do things that are site-specific, large-scale, and have an audience that's already built in of 2,000 residents. So the work doesn't sit in obscurity. People are actively living and seeing it on a daily basis. But also because we've become much more of a digital society and there are less brick and mortar galleries, having galleries and lobby space is a really smart idea of keeping the artwork engaged, but also giving opportunities to artists that wouldn't normally be there. We've created programming that not only engages the residents that live here, but also the outside audience, so that we're keeping the artwork alive, but also bringing new people in to see the collection, learn about it, but also participate. So there are drink and draws that are open to the public so that artists can come and work with a live model, which is not something that's typically offered by most residential buildings. Air Community's commitment to the arts in Philadelphia is a really powerful message that should be sent to most spaces.